They emptied my college fund for my gifted sister because she had real potential while telling me to take loans. Now they're begging for my financial help after her third business failure. They have no idea I'm the anonymous investor who just purchased their mortgage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I sat silently at my childhood dining table, watching my parents fawn over my sister's latest achievement. Another investor meeting lined up, Madison, my father beamed, pouring her more wine while my mother added the business magazine feature to what they still called Madison's Achievements scrapbook. Thanks, Dad, Madison replied with practiced modesty. At 32, she'd perfected the balance between confidence and humility that appealed to potential investors. It's just an initial meeting, not a commitment. Don't downplay it, my mother insisted, phone already out to document the moment. This is exactly why we invested everything in your education. Some people just have that special spark. That investment she mentioned so casually was my college fund. $43,000 my grandparents had earmarked specifically for me. Money that vanished into Madison's private school, elite summer programs, and Ivy League education while I was told to apply for community college scholarships. How's work going, Nathan? My father finally acknowledged me, not bothering to hide the slight disappointment in his voice. Still at that tech support company? Same as always, I replied evenly, maintaining the calm demeanor I'd perfected over decades as the ordinary child. The invisible one. The backup plan. What they didn't know was that I'd left that tech support job 4 years ago. What no one in my family knew was what had happened since then. Nathan's actually been promoted to team leader, Madison offered, attempting to highlight my achievement. She wasn't intentionally cruel, just accustomed to being the family's focal point. Right, Nate? My father nodded absently, already returning to Madison's press clipping. Good for you. Benefits package improving? Health insurance covers dental now, I replied, the lie flowing effortlessly. I hadn't worried about benefits packages since founding my first company 6 years ago. My phone vibrated with a notification. I glanced down to see confirmation from my attorney that Meridian Holdings, my private equity firm operating under a different name, had just finalized the acquisition of Cornerstone Financial, the same institution that held my parents' refinanced mortgage, taken out to fund Madison's second failed startup, a meal planning service that collapsed after burning through $275,000. Important message? My mother asked, noticing my slight smile. Just work, I replied, slipping the phone into my pocket. Nothing significant. The irony was almost unbearable. The son they'd written off as average had built a $340 million investment portfolio while maintaining the facade of a modestly successful IT professional, all to observe how long they'd continue underestimating me. Madison's third venture is launching next month, my father announced proudly. A personalized nutrition supplement subscription. The business plan is revolutionary. Traditional investors don't understand disruptive models, Madison sighed dramatically. They see my previous companies as failures rather than valuable learning experiences. I nodded, already intimately familiar with both her failed ventures. My analysts had reviewed them thoroughly. The first undercapitalized but fundamentally flawed. The second a spectacular mismanagement of resources. Not learning experiences, financial disasters enabled by parents who never allowed her to face consequences. We actually wanted to discuss something with you, Nathan, my mother said, her tone shifting to what she probably thought was subtle. With Madison's launch approaching, we're temporarily cash-strapped. We were wondering if you might help with a small loan. There it was. The real purpose behind this family dinner. Not reconnection, but financial extraction. How much are you thinking? I asked neutrally. $20,000 would make a tremendous difference, my father replied quickly. We know it's substantial, But you've been working steadily, living modestly. Family supports family. Family supports family. The phrase they never applied when redirecting my college fund. I'd need to check my finances, I said carefully. That's quite a sum for me. What they couldn't imagine was that I could write a check for $20,000 without a second thought. The modest apartment they referenced was merely one of my properties, maintained specifically to support their perception of me as the underachieving son. My father's expression hardened with disappointment. I thought you'd be more supportive of your sister, especially after all we've sacrificed for both of you. I nearly laughed aloud. After all they'd sacrificed? For both of us? I'll see what I can do, I said instead, taking a measured sip of water. Madison, to her credit, looked uncomfortable. It's fine if you can't, Nate. Really. But my parents persisted, launching into Madison's business concept while I listened silently. I already knew it would fail. The market was saturated, the margins razor-thin, the regulatory hurdles substantial. But this venture would be different from her previous attempts. This time, I would be watching from the inside. As they outlined projected revenues and growth models, I contemplated the documents awaiting my signature, paperwork that would initiate a review of their mortgage, not to foreclose but to establish the leverage I'd need for what was coming. After years of patient observation while building my empire in shadow, the time for revelation was approaching. Before I tell you what happened next at that dinner, let me take you back to where this all began. If you're joining this story for the first time, I'm Nathan, the ordinary son whose college fund was redirected to support my gifted sister Madison's education. Now I'm a secret multimillionaire whose parents have no idea they're asking for. Financial help from someone whose potential they dismissed their entire lives. Thank you all for the support on the first part of this story. If you're finding this journey of patience and calculated revelation interesting, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps this channel continue sharing stories of long-term justice and redemption. Now, let's go back to where everything changed for me. The moment I discovered my college fund had been emptied is etched into my memory with perfect clarity. I was 17, sitting at this same dining table, my college acceptance letter from Stanford clutched in my hand. It wasn't my first choice, that had been MIT, but Stanford had offered me a partial scholarship. We need to discuss your college plans, my father had said, not even congratulating me on the acceptance. My mother sat beside him, both wearing expressions of practiced concern that I would later recognize as manipulation. Stanford is offering me a partial scholarship, I explained, pushing the letter toward them. I'll still need about $30,000 a year, but Grandpa and Grandma's college fund should cover most of it. The glance my parents exchanged told me everything before they said a word. About that fund, my father began carefully. We've had to make some difficult decisions regarding family resources. My mother jumped in, her voice gentle but firm. Madison's opportunity at Westfield Academy is once in a lifetime. The connections she's making, the specialized attention, it's transformative. We had to redirect some resources to ensure she could continue there. Some resources. The entire $43,000 my grandparents had specifically designated for my education before they passed away. You spent my college fund on Madison's private high school? I asked, my voice remarkably steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. It's an investment in her future, my father replied defensively. You know how special her mind is. Her science aptitude scores are in the top percentile nationally. What about my future? I asked. My mother reached across the table, patting my hand in what she probably thought was reassurance. Nathan, honey, you're smart in your own way, but Madison has that rare potential. There are plenty of state schools that would be perfect. For you. Or community college. You could live at home and save money. Or scholarships, my father added. Lots of average students get scholarships. Average. That word landed like a slap. Not that it was new, they'd been comparing us since kindergarten. Madison's advanced reading, Madison's math aptitude, Madison's scientific intuition, all while my solid A- average and perfect attendance earned nothing more than a distracted nod. There are also student loans, my mother suggested brightly. Most people take out loans. I remember looking down at the Stanford letter, understanding that the dream it represented had just been sacrificed on the altar of my sister's potential. A familiar feeling crystallized in that moment, not just disappointment or anger, but a cold, clear resolution. If they wouldn't invest in me, I would invest in myself. I applied to the state university, qualified for partial financial aid, and got a night job at a tech support call center to cover the rest. I chose computer science, not because I was passionate about it, though I grew to be, but because it offered the clearest path to financial independence. My parents were so preoccupied with Madison's journey that they barely noticed my college years. While they attended every one of her academic showcases and award ceremonies, they visited my campus exactly once, and spent most of that visit talking about Madison's summer internship at a prestigious research lab. That same summer, while working my tech support job, I solved a persistent software problem that had been plaguing the company's customer management system. Instead of just reporting the fix, I wrote a comprehensive analysis of the system's vulnerabilities and potential optimizations. That report made its way to Elliot Mercer, the company's VP of technology. He called me into his office a week later. "You wrote this during your regular shift?" he asked, my report open on his desk. "Yes, sir." Between calls, he studied me for a moment. "You're in college, right? Computer science?" I nodded. "Why are you working night shifts at a call center instead of interning at a tech company?" "I need the money, sir. This job pays better than most internships, and I have tuition to cover." Something in my answer resonated with him. I later learned that Elliot had worked his way through college as well, with no family support. "I'm starting." "A side project," he said after a thoughtful pause. "Building a customized CRM for financial services firms. Could use someone with your analytical skills. 20 hours a week, double what you're making here, and you'd work remotely." That opportunity changed everything. Working under Elliot's mentorship, I learned not just programming, but business strategy, client relations, and product development. When his side project sold to a major financial software company 18 months later, my 5% equity stake translated to $180,000, more money than I'd ever imagined possessing. Elliot offered me a full-time position at his new venture after graduation. I accepted, but with a condition. I wanted to start my own parallel business focusing on financial technology for underserved markets. He not only agreed, but became my first investor. While Madison was starting her first doomed business with our parents' financial backing, I was building mine with careful strategy and disciplined execution. I lived frugally, reinvested most profits, and expanded methodically. When her venture collapsed 8 months later, mine was already generating 7-figure revenue. But I told no one in my family, not when I made my first million at 24, not when I bought my first commercial building at 26, not when I established Meridian Holdings, my private equity firm, at 28. Instead, I maintained the facade of modest success, a reliable job in IT, a reasonable apartment, a sensible car. During family gatherings, I listened to updates about Madison's visionary ideas and bold professional moves, nodding with practiced interest while offering minimal information about my own life. "Nathan's always been the stable one," my mother would say, the faint praise barely disguising her dismissal. Not everyone needs to change the world. Little did she know I was quietly acquiring distressed assets, revitalizing struggling companies, and building a portfolio worth hundreds of millions. Each success I kept hidden was another brick in the foundation of what would eventually become my revelation. I watched from a distance as my parents refinanced their home to fund Madison's second business attempt. I had my analysts review her business plan, identifying the fatal flaws my parents couldn't or wouldn't see. When that company inevitably failed, draining another $275,000 of family resources, I made sure Meridian Holdings was positioned to acquire the financial institution holding their new mortgage, all while maintaining my role as the overlooked son, the reliable background character in the Madison show. The perfect cover for what I was building. Some might call it deception. I call it strategic patience. Elliot, now my business partner and confidant, questioned my secrecy. "Why not just tell them?" he asked during a late dinner after closing a major acquisition. "Show them what you've built?" "It's not about proving them wrong," I replied, though part of me knew that wasn't entirely true. "It's about understanding the full extent of their perception, how long they'll continue to see only what they expect to see." The truth was more complex. I was waiting for the perfect moment, not just to reveal my success, but to create a situation where they would have to confront the consequences of their choices. A situation where the son they had dismissed as average would be the only one who could save them from their own financial mistakes. That moment was now approaching, 15 years after they emptied my college fund, as they sat across from me, at the dinner table asking for money to fund Madison's third business failure. What they didn't realize was that I already owned their mortgage. I already controlled their financial future, and I was about to present them with a choice that would force them to recognize exactly what they had overlooked all these years. The stage was set. The players were in position. The revelation was about to begin. Now that you understand how I built my success in secret, let's return to that pivotal dinner where my parents asked me for $20,000 to fund Madison's third business venture. What happened next set in motion a chain of events that would finally bring 15 years of patient planning to fruition. Thank you all for your support and engagement with this story so far. Your comments about similar experiences show how common it is for families to invest unequally in their children. If you're finding value in this journey, consider subscribing to join our community of shared experiences. Now, let's continue. "I'll have to think about the loan," I told my parents as I prepared to leave that evening. "I'll let you know in a few days." My father's disappointment was palpable. "We were hoping for a more immediate response, Nathan. Madison's launch timeline is tight." "I understand," I replied evenly, "but $20,000 is significant for someone in my position. I need to review my finances carefully." My mother sighed that familiar sigh, the one that had accompanied every perceived shortcoming throughout my childhood. "Madison would help you without hesitation if the situations were reversed. Because you've always made sure Madison had resources to spare," I thought but didn't say. Instead, I simply nodded and promised to be in touch soon. Madison walked me to my car, a reliable but unremarkable Honda that reinforced my carefully constructed image of modest means. "You don't have to do this, Nate," she said once we were out of earshot of our parents. "I know it's not fair of them to ask." There was genuine discomfort in her expression. Madison wasn't malicious, just the product of our parents' excessive focus and support. She'd been told she was exceptional so consistently that she'd never developed the skills to question her own capabilities. "Are you confident in this business?" "Concept?" I asked her directly. "Absolutely," she replied with characteristic enthusiasm. "The supplement market is growing exponentially, and personalization is the future. We already have preliminary interest from several investors." I nodded, knowing from my analysts' reports that those interested investors had already declined to commit actual funds. "I'll see what I can do," I said simply. Back in my car, I called Elliot. "How was the family dinner?" he asked, familiar with the whole situation. "They asked for exactly what we predicted, $20,000 for Madison's new venture. And it's time to execute Phase 1. Phase 1 had been meticulously planned for months, ever since my intelligence network had picked up early signals of Madison's third business attempt. We had mapped out every contingency, every possible reaction, and every counter-move. The following morning, I convened a special meeting at Meridian Holdings headquarters, a sleek downtown office building that my family had never seen. My executive team gathered in the conference room, already briefed on the situation. Cornerstone Financial is officially part of our portfolio, I confirmed. We now control the mortgage on my parents' home. Maya, my chief legal counsel, placed a folder before me. The loan review documents are ready for your signature. Once filed, your parents will receive formal notification that their mortgage is under review due to concerning patterns of equity extraction. And the timing? I asked. They'll receive the notice approximately 3 days after you decline. Their loan request, replied Derek, my operations director. The psychological impact will be maximized if they're already processing one financial disappointment. Some might consider this approach cold or calculating, but I wasn't planning to destroy my parents financially, only to create a situation where they would be forced to recognize the consequences of their choices and the reality of who I had become, despite their lack of support. What about Madison's business plan? Asked Sophia, my chief investment analyst. Have we completed the comprehensive assessment? She nodded, pulling up a detailed presentation on the conference room screen. The supplements market is oversaturated and highly regulated. Madison's proposed differentiation, algorithm-driven personalization, lacks substantive proprietary technology. We project an 87% probability of failure within 18 months, with total capital loss. Unless, I prompted, unless the business model is completely restructured to focus on the proprietary diagnostic tool rather than the supplements themselves. The technology could be valuable if properly developed and marketed to established supplement companies instead of directly to consumers. This was the twist I had been considering. Madison wasn't without talent. She had genuine creativity and vision. What she lacked was practical business acumen and the experience that comes from having to earn one's successes rather than having them facilitated. Prepare a formal assessment and alternative business model, I instructed. We'll present it at the appropriate time. With Phase 1 preparations complete, I returned to my modest apartment, the one my family believed was my primary residence. 3 days later, I called my parents with my decision. I've reviewed my finances, I told my father over the phone, my tone apologetic but firm. I'm afraid I can't manage $20,000 right now. Between my student loans and saving for a down payment, on a condo, my resources are committed. The disappointment in his voice was tinged with the familiar note of judgment. I thought family would be a priority for you, Nathan. This is about supporting your sister's future. I understand, I replied calmly. But I need to be responsible with my own finances. Your sister would have helped you, he added, echoing my mother's earlier sentiment. Perhaps, I acknowledged, but Madison has always had advantages I haven't. What's that supposed to mean? His tone sharpened. Simply that our opportunities haven't been equal. I had to fund my own education, remember? The uncomfortable silence that followed told me he remembered perfectly well. That was a family decision based on available resources, he finally said. We've always tried to do what's best for both of you. I understand, I replied, choosing not to argue. The evidence of my success would speak louder than any debate could. I hope Madison finds the funding she needs. 2 days later, right on schedule, my parents received formal notification from Cornerstone Financial, now a Meridian Holdings subsidiary, that their mortgage was under review. Their home equity line of credit was temporarily frozen pending. The completion of this review, my mother called in a panic. Nathan, we've received a terrifying letter from the bank about our mortgage, she said, her voice tight with anxiety. They're saying they need to review our account because of multiple equity withdrawals. They've frozen our line of credit. That sounds stressful, I replied, injecting just the right amount of concern into my voice. Do they say why they're reviewing it now? Something about the bank being acquired by a new company. A Meridian Holdings. Have you ever heard of them? The name sounds vaguely familiar, I said, suppressing a smile. What do they want you to do? We have to submit documentation about our income, expenses, and the purpose of our previous equity, withdrawals. And we have to meet with a loan officer next week. Her voice cracked slightly. Nathan, if they call in the loan, we could lose the house. We don't have the resources to pay it off, especially after investing in Madison's businesses. I'm sure it won't come to that, I reassured her. Banks don't typically call in performing loans without reason. But what if they do? The letter mentions concerning patterns in our account. Try not to panic before your meeting, I advised. Be honest about your finances and see what options they present. Your father is beside himself, she continued. This couldn't have come at a worse time with Madison's launch so close. The frozen credit line means we can't provide the seed money we promised her. And there it was. The precise pressure point we had targeted. Their ability to financially enable Madison's third business failure had been neutralized, at least temporarily. Maybe this is an opportunity for Madison to seek outside investors, I suggested. Professional funding might come with valuable mentorship and guidance. My mother didn't respond to this directly. Nathan, I know you said you couldn't help with the business funding, but is there any way you could help us prepare for this bank meeting? You've always been good with numbers and explanations. The irony was almost too perfect. After dismissing my potential for decades, she was now turning to me for the very skills they had never valued. I can look at the paperwork if you'd like, I offered. When is the meeting scheduled? Next Thursday at 10 a.m. The letter says we'll be meeting with someone named Elena Reyes, a senior loan review officer. Elena was, in fact, one of my most trusted financial analysts, carefully selected for this role. The meeting would be recorded and every word analyzed. I'll come by tomorrow evening to review your financial documents, I said, and I can attend the meeting with you if that would help. Oh, Nathan, thank you, my mother breathed, relief evident in her voice. I knew we could count on you in a crisis. As I ended the call, I reflected on the irony of her statement. They had never counted on me before, never believed I was worthy of their investment or faith. Now, unwittingly, they were turning to me to solve a problem that I had orchestrated. Phase 1 was complete. My parents were now facing financial uncertainty. Their ability to fund Madison's business was temporarily suspended, and they had invited me, the son whose potential they had dismissed, to help them navigate the crisis. Phase 2 would begin at that bank meeting, where Elena would present them with options that would subtly but inexorably lead them toward the moment of revelation I had been planning for 15 years. The evening before the bank meeting, I arrived, at my parents' house with a leather portfolio and the demeanor of someone ready to help. Exactly the supportive son they needed in this crisis. What they couldn't see was that every aspect of what was about to unfold had been meticulously choreographed. Thank you all for your continued support and engagement with this story. Your comments about similar experiences have been enlightening and show how these family dynamics affect many of us. If you're finding value in this journey, consider subscribing to join our community. Now, let's continue with the next chapter in this carefully orchestrated revelation. My father answered the door, his usual confident posture diminished by the financial uncertainty hanging over them. Nathan, he said with forced casualness. Thanks for coming. The dining room table, the same one where they had informed me my college fund had been reallocated 15 years earlier, was now covered with financial documents, bank statements, and property assessments. My mother sat surrounded by papers, reading glasses perched on her nose, a notepad filled with anxious calculations beside her. This is everything, she said, gesturing to the chaos before her. Mortgage statements, equity withdrawal records, tax returns. I don't understand why they're putting us through this. We've never missed a payment. I settled into a chair and began methodically organizing their documents, creating neat stacks by category. Banks typically conduct reviews after acquisitions, I explained. They want to understand their new portfolio, especially for lines of credit with significant withdrawals. My father paced behind us. It's invasive. We've been with Cornerstone for 20 years. Now suddenly this Meridian company comes in and starts questioning our financial decisions. I suppressed a smile at hearing him unwittingly criticize my company. What exactly did you use the equity withdrawals for? I asked, though I already knew the answer down to the dollar. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. It's relevant to the review, I prompted. The bank will want detailed explanations. My mother sighed. The first major withdrawal was for Madison's initial business venture, the Pet Connection app. That was $210,000. And the second? Her health analytics platform, my father replied defensively. That required more substantial investment, $275,000, but both were sound business investments. I nodded neutrally while organizing the documentation. And the results of those investments? Another uncomfortable silence. Business ventures involve risk, my father finally said. Madison gained valuable experience even though the companies didn't ultimately succeed. That's what we'll need to convey to the loan officer, I said. That these weren't just failed investments but learning experiences with potential future returns. Exactly, my mother exclaimed, relieved by my apparent understanding. Madison is incorporating all those lessons into her new venture. Which you're planning to fund with another equity withdrawal? I asked. We were, my father admitted. Until they froze our credit line. We had committed $85,000 to her launch. I nodded, making notes in my portfolio. And your current income and savings situation? More uncomfortable glances. Your retirement accounts? I pressed. Emergency funds? We've had to be flexible with our retirement planning, my mother said carefully. Madison's ventures required significant capital at critical moments. Translation. They had depleted their retirement savings and were effectively betting their financial future on my sister's unproven business acumen. I see, I said, continuing to organize their financial picture. And Madison's own investment in her businesses? Has she contributed capital? She contributes her vision and expertise, my father replied stiffly. That's more valuable than capital. I bit back a response about the marketplace's differing opinion on that valuation and continued my assessment. By the end of the evening, I had compiled a comprehensive financial overview that painted a concerning picture. My parents had approximately $430,000 in remaining home equity, their primary asset, minimal retirement savings, and a pattern of extracting equity to fund businesses that provided zero return. Based on this review, I told them carefully, I think you should prepare for the bank to express serious concerns about your financial stability. The color drained from my mother's face. Do you think they'll call in the loan? It's possible, I acknowledged. At minimum, they'll likely want to restructure the terms and definitely keep the equity line frozen. My father slumped into a chair, a rare display of vulnerability. If they call in the loan, we're finished. We don't have $430,000. Let's not panic before the meeting, I advised. I'll come with you and help present your situation in the best possible light. They thanked me profusely, suddenly appreciating the financial acumen they had never valued before. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the irony. They had invested everything in Madison's potential, yet now depended on my overlooked skills to save them. The following morning, I arrived at my parents' house wearing my most modest suit. Nothing. That would suggest the wealth I actually possessed. We drove to Cornerstone Financial in my father's car, my mother nervously reviewing the talking points I had prepared. Remember, I coached them, Acknowledge the previous investments, emphasize the learning experiences, and focus on your perfect payment history. The bank's lobby featured new Meridian Holdings signage, my company's distinctive blue and silver logo prominently displayed. My parents didn't notice my small smile of satisfaction as we checked in at the reception desk. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilson?" The receptionist greeted them. "Ms. Reyes will see you now. Please follow me." We were shown to a well-appointed conference room, where Elena Reyes, my senior financial analyst, waited with a professional smile. She gave no indication that she knew me, though we had rehearsed this meeting extensively. "Good morning," she said, shaking hands firmly. "I'm Elena Reyes, Senior Loan Review Officer. Thank you for coming in today." My father immediately took charge, explaining their long history with the bank and perfect payment record. Elena listened, politely before opening a folder containing the same financial overview I had compiled the night before, though hers had been prepared weeks earlier. "I appreciate your history with Cornerstone," she said, "but Meridian Holdings has implemented new risk assessment protocols. We've identified concerning patterns in your account that require addressing." "What concerning patterns?" my father asked defensively. "We've never missed a payment." "Payment history is only one factor," Elena explained. "We also evaluate the purpose of equity extractions and the resulting return on investment. In your case, you've withdrawn $485,000 over the past 5 years primarily to fund business ventures that have produced zero return and are now effectively lost capital." My mother paled. "Those were investments in our daughter's businesses." "I understand," Elena replied, her tone professional but firm. "However, from a risk management perspective, we see a pattern of diminishing assets without corresponding income growth. Your debt-to-income ratio has increased significantly, while your retirement assets have decreased by 64%. My father glanced at me, silently pleading for intervention. I leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Reyes, I understand the bank's concerns. What options are available to my parents?" Elena opened another folder. "We've prepared 3 potential paths forward." She outlined the options exactly as I had instructed during our preparation. Option 1. Refinance with significantly higher interest rates and insurance requirements, with the equity line permanently closed. Option 2. Sell the house and downsize, using the proceeds to clear the mortgage and establish retirement savings. Option 3. Find an investor willing to purchase the mortgage from Meridian at the current value. "These are our only options?" my father asked, his voice hollow. "Given your financial profile, yes," Elena confirmed. "Meridian's risk management policies are quite strict. However, option 3 would allow you to maintain your current living situation if you can find an appropriate investor." "Where would we find someone willing to invest in our mortgage?" my mother asked desperately. Elena glanced at her computer screen. "Actually, there is a note in the system. The director of private acquisitions at Meridian flagged your file personally. It seems they might be interested in arranging a private investor solution." My father grasped at this lifeline. "Yes, absolutely. We'd meet any time." "Excellent," Elena replied, checking her calendar. "The director has availability next Tuesday at 2 p.m. You'll meet at Meridian Holdings' main office." She handed them a business card with the address. My parents didn't recognize it, but the address was for my corporate headquarters, the building where I spent most of my working hours, the center of the financial empire I had built while they believed I was working an ordinary IT job. "Thank you," my mother said, clutching the card like a life preserver. "We'll be there." As we left the bank, my parents were visibly shaken, but clinging to the hope offered by the mysterious director's interest. "What do you think it means?" my mother asked me as we walked to the car. "Why would a director be interested in our mortgage?" "Hard to say," I replied neutrally, "but it's definitely worth exploring." "Nathan, we can't thank you enough for your "Help today," my father said, the genuine gratitude in his voice a stark contrast to his usual dismissiveness toward me. "Your financial knowledge really made a difference." "I'm happy to help," I said simply. "Could you come to the meeting next week?" my mother asked. "We could really use your expertise." "I have work commitments," I replied carefully, "but I'll help you prepare this weekend." What I didn't tell them was that I would indeed be at that meeting, not as their supportive son, but as the director of private acquisitions at Meridian Holdings. The revelation I had planned for 15 years was now just 5 days away. That weekend, I helped my parents prepare for a meeting I had designed. I coached them on questions to ask and points to emphasize, all while knowing exactly how the scenario would unfold. I also ensured Madison would be present, arranging for Elena to call and suggest the entire family attend since the potential solution might impact Madison's business plans. On Monday, I met with my executive team for final preparations. The conference room where the revelation would occur was prepared with multiple discrete cameras to capture my parents' reactions. Key documents were organized in precise order for maximum impact. My assistant had instructions regarding the exact timing of interruptions in information delivery. "Are you nervous?" Elliot asked me after the others had left. "Not nervous," I replied thoughtfully. "But I find myself wondering how they'll react. Will they be proud? Angry? Embarrassed?" "Probably all three," he said. "The question is, what comes after the revelation? What do you want from this?" It was a question I had considered extensively. "Recognition," I said finally. "Not celebration or contrition, just honest recognition of what they missed, what they dismissed, and perhaps a recalibration of how they view potential and success." As Tuesday approached, 15 years of patient planning was about to culminate. In a single meeting, the stage was set for my parents to finally see me, truly see me, for the first time. Tuesday arrived, the day I had been methodically working toward for 15 years. While my parents and Madison prepared for their meeting with Meridian Holdings' mysterious director, I was in my actual office on the top floor of the building they would soon enter, reviewing the final details of my revelation plan. Thank you all for your incredible support as this story unfolds. Your comments about similar family dynamics have been both validating and heartbreaking. If you're finding value in this journey of patient justice, consider subscribing to join our community. Now, let's witness the moment when 15 years of careful planning finally comes to fruition. "Mr. Wilson and family have arrived," my assistant Vanessa announced through the intercom. "They're being escorted to the Aspen conference room as planned." "Thank you," I replied. "Please inform Elena to begin the preliminary meeting. I'll arrive in exactly 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes were deliberately calculated. Elena would establish the serious nature of the situation, review their financial predicament one more time, and most importantly, emphasize the exceptional nature of a director taking personal interest in their case. I changed from my usual executive attire into a more conservative suit, one my parents had seen before, but paired with accessories they hadn't, the platinum Patek Philippe watch I typically wore to board meetings, the custom-made Italian leather shoes, the subtle diamond cufflinks that signaled success without flaunting it. Elliot appeared at my office door. "Everything's ready. How are you feeling?" "Centered," I replied. "It's strange. I've imagined this moment countless times, but now that it's here, I feel almost detached. Like I'm observing rather than participating." "Psychological protection," he noted. 15 years is a long time to maintain a deception, even a justified one. I nodded, checking my watch. "It's time." We walked together to the executive elevator, a private lift that would take us directly to the floor where my family waited. In the elevator, Elliot handed me a tablet displaying the live feed from the conference room. My parents sat tensely at the massive walnut table, my mother nervously adjusting her jewelry, my father repeatedly straightening his tie. Madison sat, between them, reviewing notes they had apparently prepared together. Elena sat across from them, her professional demeanor giving no hint that this was all carefully orchestrated. "The director is extremely selective about personal interventions," Elena was saying as I watched. "In fact, this is only the third case this year where they've taken direct interest. Do you know why our situation caught their attention?" My father asked, trying to sound confident but unable to hide his anxiety. "I understand it's connected to a larger investment strategy," Elena replied, exactly as we had rehearsed. "The director believes your situation presents unique opportunities, beyond just the mortgage resolution." My mother leaned forward. "Is this about Madison's business concept? Has someone at Meridian recognized its potential?" The hope in her voice was painful to hear, still focusing on Madison's potential, even in the midst of financial crisis. They faced because of that same misplaced faith. The elevator arrived at our floor. I took a deep breath, handed the tablet back to Elliot, and prepared for the moment 15 years in the making. "Follow 30 seconds behind me," I instructed him. He nodded, understanding his role in what was about to unfold. I walked confidently, down the corridor, past offices filled with executives who actually reported to me, toward the conference room where my family sat unaware of whose company they had entered. When I reached the heavy oak door, I paused for one final moment of reflection. This wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition, about finally being seen. I opened the door. Elena immediately stood. "Sir, thank you for joining us." My parents and Madison turned toward the door, expressions of respectful anticipation on their faces, the look people reserve for important strangers who might solve their problems. And then recognition dawned, confusion replacing anticipation as they struggled to reconcile my presence. "Nathan?" my father said uncertainly. "What are you doing here? Is the director running late?" I walked calmly to the head of the table, nodding professionally to Elena, who gathered her materials and quietly exited. I remained standing, allowing the tension of the moment to build. "The director isn't late," I replied evenly. "I am the director. More specifically, I'm the founder and CEO of Meridian Holdings." The silence that followed was absolute. 3 pairs of eyes stared at me, processing information that couldn't possibly align with their understanding of reality. "That's not possible," my father finally said. "You work in IT support." "I haven't worked in IT support for 12 years, I replied calmly, taking my seat at the head of the table. "That was simply what I allowed you to believe." At that moment, Elliot entered, placing a leather portfolio in front of me before taking a seat to my right. "The documents you requested, sir," he said formally, playing his role perfectly. "Thank you, Elliot." I opened the portfolio, removing 3 bound presentation booklets and sliding one to each family member. These materials should help clarify the situation. The cover page displayed the Meridian Holdings logo, and beneath it, "Founded by Nathan Wilson, 2018. The second page showed a summary of company holdings, total assets under management, number of employees, annual revenue, and corporate headquarters, the very building we sat in. My mother's hand trembled as she turned to the third page, my official biography and corporate photograph. "This isn't a joke?" Madison asked, her voice small and uncertain. "No," I replied simply. "Meridian Holdings is my company. I founded it 7 years ago after the successful exit from my first venture. We currently manage assets exceeding $340 million and employ 178 people across 3 countries. My father's face had gone pale, his financial background sufficient to understand the scale of what I was describing. But how? When? "I've been building this since I was 22, I explained, my voice level and professional. "My first opportunity came during college, working nights at a tech support center while attending the state university. The only education I could afford after my college fund was redirected." The pointed reference wasn't lost on them. My mother flinched visibly. I developed a proprietary customer management system that was acquired for $3.6 million. I reinvested those funds in a financial technology startup that I scaled and sold for $28 million 3 years later. Meridian Holdings was established with those proceeds, focusing initially on distressed financial assets. I turned to a specific page in the presentation, including, as of last month, Cornerstone Financial, the institution holding your mortgage. The realization of what this meant hit my father first. "You orchestrated this entire situation," he said slowly. "The mortgage review, the frozen equity line." "Yes," I acknowledged without apology. "Though I should note that your financial situation is genuinely precarious, regardless of who owns the mortgage. The bank's concerns are legitimate." Madison was rapidly flipping through the presentation, her expression shifting from shock to something like awe. "You've been doing all this while we thought you were just getting by?" "I made a decision 15 years ago," I explained. "When I discovered my college fund had been emptied to support your education and opportunities, I realized my potential would never be recognized in this family. Rather than fight for acknowledgement, I chose to build my success in silence." Mother found her voice, though it wavered unsteadily. "But why the deception? Why let us believe you were struggling?" "That's an interesting question," I replied, allowing a hint of emotion to enter my voice for the first time. "Why would I hide my success from the very people who should have been my biggest supporters? Perhaps for the same reason you felt comfortable asking your supposedly struggling son for $20,000 while sitting in a house filled with expensive furniture and artwork." My father straightened defensively. "We've always wanted the best for both our children." "Have you?" I asked quietly. "Or have you only ever seen potential in one of us?" Elliot discreetly placed another document in front of me, a single sheet containing the full history of my grandparents' college fund, including the original stipulation that it be used specifically for my education. "Do you remember what you told me when I was accepted to Stanford?" I asked, sliding the document toward my parents. "You said Madison had rare potential that justified redirecting my education fund. You suggested community college for average students like me." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We never meant to hurt you, Nathan. We truly believed we were making the right decision for the family." "I understand that," I replied, my tone softening slightly. "You made investment decisions based on perceived potential. As it happens, so did I. I invested in myself when no one else would." Madison looked devastated, perhaps truly realizing for the first time how our parents' favoritism had affected me. "I didn't know, Nate, about the college fund, about Stanford. They never told me." "This isn't your fault," I assured her. "You didn't create the dynamic, you just existed within it." I turned back to my parents. "Now, about your current situation. Your mortgage is indeed under review, your equity line is frozen, and you've depleted most of your retirement savings funding business ventures that yielded no returns. Those are the facts." My father's business instincts finally engaged. "And as the owner of our mortgage, what do you intend to do?" It was the question everything had been building toward. I opened another section of the presentation. "I'm prepared to offer a comprehensive solution," I said. "But first, I want to discuss Madison's new business venture." Madison looked surprised to be the sudden focus. "My supplement company?" "Yes," I replied. "My analysts have thoroughly reviewed your business plan. In its current form, it has an 87% probability of failure within 18 months. Her face fell. "You can't possibly know that." "Actually, we can," I said, turning to specific pages in the presentation that detailed market saturation, regulatory hurdles, and capital requirements. "The supplement market is extraordinarily competitive and heavily regulated. Your differentiator, algorithmic personalization, lacks proprietary technology or meaningful barriers to entry. Our parents bristled at this assessment, their instinct to defend Madison kicking in despite the circumstances. However, I continued before they could object, there is significant potential in pivoting the concept. The diagnostic technology and algorithm you've developed have value, not as a consumer product, but as a service to existing supplement manufacturers. I outlined an alternative business approach that would leverage her strengths while mitigating the weaknesses in her original plan. With proper restructuring and mentorship, I concluded, this concept could become viable. Not the unicorn our parents always imagined for you, Madison, but a sustainable business generating reasonable returns. She considered this without immediately rejecting it. A good sign. You've really analyzed my business plan that thoroughly? I've had my best people on it for weeks, I confirmed. The same team that evaluates multi-million-dollar investments for our portfolio. I closed the presentation booklet and looked at each of them in turn. So, here's my offer. I'll resolve your mortgage situation and provide seed funding for Madison's pivoted business concept, under specific conditions. The conference room fell silent as my family processed the sudden shift in dynamics. For perhaps the first time in our shared history, I was the one setting terms, the one with the power to determine outcomes. The realization visibly transformed their postures. My father's usual authoritative stance diminished, my mother's confident certainty replaced by wary anticipation, and Madison's entitled expectation giving way to cautious hope. Thank you, all, for your incredible support as this story reaches its climax. Your comments about what you would do in this situation have been fascinating to read. If you're finding value in this journey of patient justice, consider subscribing to join our community. Now, let's see what conditions come with my offer to help my family. Before I outline my conditions, I said, pressing a button on the conference table that signaled Vanessa to bring in refreshments, I want to be absolutely clear about something. This isn't about revenge. My father's skeptical expression suggested he didn't believe me. It's not, I insisted. If revenge were my goal, I would simply foreclose on your mortgage, decline to invest in Madison's business, and leave you to face the consequences of your financial decisions. That would be easy. What I'm proposing is considerably more difficult. For all of us. Vanessa entered with a tray of water and coffee, setting it down silently before exiting. The brief interruption gave my family a moment to process what I'd said. Then what is this about? My mother asked, her voice uncharacteristically small. Recognition and realignment, I replied, pouring myself water. Recognition of past patterns and realignment of future relationships. I opened a new document on the table before me. Here are my conditions. First, I'll restructure your mortgage with favorable terms, allowing you to remain in your home with manageable payments. Second, I'll establish a $250,000 investment fund for Madison's business, contingent on her accepting the pivoted business model and completing a formal business education program. Madison's eyes widened at the figure, but I held up my hand to forestall her response. However, these offers come with specific requirements, I continued. The mortgage will be restructured as a 15-year fixed rate at 2 points below market, but with a unique repayment mechanism. Instead of making payments to Meridian Holdings, you'll contribute the equivalent amount to a newly established scholarship fund at the state university I attended. My father's brow furrowed. A scholarship fund? Yes, I replied. The Nathan Wilson First Generation College Scholarship, providing full tuition to students whose parents cannot or will not support their education. The pointed nature of this condition wasn't lost on any of them. My mother winced visibly. The scholarship will be publicly announced, I continued, with you listed as the primary donors. Each quarter, you'll participate in scholarship selection, committee meetings, and attend events celebrating recipient achievements. You want to publicly humiliate us, my father said flatly. No, I countered. I want you to publicly commit to values you should have held privately. I want you to face, repeatedly, consistently, over 15 years, the reality of potential that exists in unexpected places. Every student you help will serve as a reminder of what you failed to see in your own son. My directness silenced him more effectively than anger would have. Regarding Madison's business, I continued, turning to my sister, the $250,000 investment comes with even more significant conditions. First, you must complete an MBA program, a real one, not an online certificate, focusing on entrepreneurial leadership. Madison nodded slowly, understanding the implication. She needed actual business education, not just vision and confidence. Second, you'll work with a business mentor of my choosing for a minimum of 2 years, implementing the pivoted business model we've outlined. During that time, you'll receive a modest salary rather than extravagant founder equity. You'll earn your ownership, stake through demonstrated performance metrics. That's unusually structured, she said carefully. It is, I agreed, because it addresses the fundamental flaw in your previous ventures. You've never had to earn success. It's always been given to you based on perceived potential rather than demonstrated results. That changes now. I turned back to my parents. There's one final condition that applies to all of you. For the next year, we will attend monthly family therapy sessions with a counselor who specializes in family business dynamics and parental favoritism. My father immediately stiffened. That's ridiculous. We don't need therapy. That reaction precisely demonstrates why we do, I replied calmly. Your instinctive rejection of external assessment is the same pattern that prevented you from seeing the imbalance you created between your children. My mother placed a restraining hand on my father's arm. Robert, please, let's hear Nathan. Out completely before responding. It was perhaps the first time I'd witnessed her prioritize understanding me over defending him. The therapy isn't punitive, I explained. It's foundational. We can't build new relationships on the same broken patterns. If we're going to move forward, if I'm going to invest my resources in this family, then we need to establish healthier dynamics. Madison spoke up, surprising me. I think therapy is reasonable. I think we need it. My father turned to her, betrayal evident in his expression. Madison, you can't be serious. I am, she said quietly. Nathan's right. The way you two have treated us has never been equal. I benefited from it, so I didn't question it, but that doesn't make it right. This unexpected alliance shifted the energy in the room. For perhaps the first time, Madison and I were united, while our parents found themselves isolated in defending the indefensible. These conditions are non-negotiable, I stated clearly. You can accept them in their entirety, or you can decline. If you decline, I won't foreclose immediately, but I will maintain the current freeze on your equity line and require strict adherence to standard mortgage terms. Madison's business will receive no investment from me. You'll be treated exactly like any other mortgage client in your financial situation. My father's business training finally engaged. May we have time to consider these terms? Of course, I replied. I'll give you 1 week to decide. But I should note that the offer is conditional on unanimous acceptance. If any one of you declines, the offer is void for all. Elliot, who had remained silent throughout the meeting, slid folders containing the detailed terms to each of them. This document outlines everything I've described, along with specific timelines and commitments. I explained. Review it carefully. Consult with advisors if you wish, though I'd recommend discretion given the family nature of these arrangements. My mother looked up from the folder, her eyes swimming with tears. Nathan, I need to ask, all this success, this company, everything you've built, why didn't you tell us? Were you planning this moment all along? It was the question I'd anticipated, the one that cut to the heart of 15 years of silence. I didn't tell you because I needed to understand something essential, I replied honestly. I needed to know if you would ever recognize my potential, without external validation. If you would ever value me based on who I am rather than measurable achievements. I gestured around the impressive conference room. And the answer became increasingly clear. Year after year, as I built this company, as my financial security exceeded anything you could imagine, you continued to see me as the lesser child. Even a week ago, you felt comfortable asking me for $20,000 while expressing doubt I could provide it, never once considering there might be more to me than what you assumed. "We're your parents," my father said defensively. "We've always been proud of you." "Proud of what exactly?" I challenged. "Until 30 minutes ago, you believed I was an IT support specialist living paycheck to paycheck. What specifically were you proud of? Because from where I stand, you've been proud of Madison's potential while accepting my mediocrity." He had no response. Madison broke the uncomfortable silence. "I have a question about the business investment," she said, flipping through the detailed terms. "It says here that any profit distributions will be split, with 30% directed to repaying the Nathan Wilson College Fund plus compounded interest. What does that mean?" I met her gaze steadily. "It means that if your business succeeds, a portion of the profits will go toward symbolically restoring what was taken from me, the $43,000 college fund our grandparents established, plus the compounded returns it would have generated over 15 years. Approximately $103,000 in total." Understanding dawned on her face. "You're making them repay your college fund." "No," I corrected. "I'm establishing a principle that actions have consequences, and that debts, moral as well as financial, eventually come due. The repayment isn't to me personally. It will fund additional scholarships." My mother wiped tears from her cheeks. "Nathan, I don't know what to say. We never meant to hurt you. We thought we were doing what was best." "I believe that," I said, my tone softening slightly. "But intention doesn't negate impact. You made a series of choices that communicated my potential wasn't worth investing in. Now you're facing the consequences of those choices, just as I had to face the consequences of having my educational opportunities limited." I stood, signaling the meeting was concluding. "You have 1 week to consider these terms. If you accept, we'll move forward with restructuring the mortgage and establishing Madison's business investment immediately. If you decline, we'll proceed with standard foreclosure evaluations." "And if we accept," my father asked, finding his voice, "what does that mean for our relationship going forward? Is this just a business arrangement, or are you still our son?" It was the question that had haunted me throughout my planning. What did I want our relationship to be after the revelation? "That depends entirely on what happens next," I replied honestly. "If you view these conditions as punishment to be endured rather than opportunities for genuine change, then yes, this will remain transactional. But if you're willing to truly see me, not as the successful CEO who can solve your problems, but as the son whose potential you missed, then perhaps we can build something authentic." I gestured to Elliot, who stood to escort them out. 1 week, I reminded them. Take the time to really consider not just the financial implications, but the personal ones as well. As they gathered their materials, Madison lingered behind while our parents stepped into the hallway with Elliot. "For what it's worth," she said quietly. "I'm sorry, Nate. I didn't understand what was happening when we were younger, but I should have questioned it as an adult. I benefited from their favoritism without ever considering what it cost you." Her sincerity surprised me. "Thank you for acknowledging that." "I'm going to accept your conditions," she continued. "Not just for the investment, but because I think you're right about everything. The business model, the education I need, all of it. I've been allowed to fail upward my entire life, and it hasn't served me well." I studied my sister's face, seeing perhaps for the first time a glimmer of the self-awareness she would need to truly succeed. That's a promising start, I told her. After they left, Elliot returned to the conference room, closing the door behind him. Well, he said, taking a seat, that was even more intense than we anticipated. How are you feeling? I considered the question carefully. Lighter, I finally responded, as if I've set down something I've been carrying for a very long time. Do you think they'll accept? Madison will, I said confidently. My mother probably will as well. My father, I shrugged. His pride might be too wounded, but he's also practical enough to recognize a favorable deal when it's the only option. And if they do accept, Elliot asked, what then? Is this closure for you, or just the beginning of a new chapter? I glanced at the family photo on my desk, the only personal item in my otherwise minimalist office. It was taken on my 10th birthday, before academic performance and potential became the metrics of parental love. We were all smiling genuinely. Neither, I replied. It's a recalibration, an opportunity to build relationships based on who we actually are, rather than who they assumed I would be. The week that followed would determine whether that opportunity could be realized. The 7 days following our confrontation at Meridian Holdings were among the strangest of my life. After 15 years of careful deception, the truth was finally exposed. The question now was how my family would respond to that truth, and to the conditions I had attached to my offer of assistance. Thank you all for your continued support as we reach the conclusion of this story. Your comments about similar family dynamics and how you've addressed them have added valuable perspective. If you're finding value in this journey, consider subscribing to join our community. Now, let's see how everything unfolded. I deliberately maintained distance during their week of deliberation, giving them space to process the revelation on their own terms. On the 3rd day, Madison requested a meeting. We met at a quiet cafe downtown where she surprised me with her thoughtful analysis of the business pivot I'd suggested. You're right about the B2B approach, she admitted. The market analysis makes sense. I've been researching MBA programs too. Her candor caught me off guard. You've already decided to accept the conditions? Yes, she confirmed. This past week has been illuminating. Seeing how much you've accomplished with none of the advantages I had, it's forced me to reconsider a lot of assumptions. She met my gaze directly. I've failed at 3 businesses despite every advantage. You built an empire despite every obstacle. That reality check was long overdue. When we parted, she asked a question that lingered with me. Why include me in your offer at all? You could have just helped our parents and left me to figure out my failures on my own. Because you're not responsible for their choices, I replied. Honestly. You benefited from them, but you didn't create the dynamic. And I believe you do have genuine potential, Madison. Not the mythical, unerring potential they projected onto you, but real capabilities that have been undermined by their excessive support. The day before the deadline, my mother visited my office alone. She looked small and uncertain in the sleek corporate environment of Meridian Holdings. Nathan, I wanted to speak with you privately, she began, hands fidgeting in her lap. First, I'm accepting your terms, all of them. She placed an envelope on my desk. But I came to return something that belongs to you. This contains all the documentation related to your grandparents' college fund. Why now? I asked. Because you deserve the full truth, she replied, her voice wavering. The fund wasn't just $43,000. By the time you were ready for college, it had grown to nearly $76,000 with investment returns. We never told you the full amount because we thought it would make you more resistant to our decision. The revelation hit me harder than expected. The betrayal was even more substantial than I'd realized. We failed you, Nathan, she continued, tears forming. Not just by redirecting your fund, but by consistently undervaluing your potential. The evidence of that failure is all around me in this building you've created. It was the most honest acknowledgement she had ever offered. No excuses, just recognition of reality. She handed me a worn notebook. This was your grandfather's. He kept notes about his grandchildren. There are entries about you that I think you should see. I opened to a marked page. My grandfather's handwriting jumped out at me. Nathan, age 12, built a working model water filtration system for science. Fair? Researched independently, sourced materials himself. Robert and Linda seem focused on Madison's awards, but Nathan's project showed remarkable independence and problem-solving. This boy has the quiet determination that builds lasting success. The college fund is the right investment in his future. A lump formed in my throat, validation from beyond the grave that someone had seen my potential, even when my parents hadn't. The final day arrived. At precisely 2 p.m., my family entered the conference room. My father looked aged, his usual confidence diminished. My mother appeared nervous but resolved. Madison carried herself with new professionalism. "Thank you for coming," I began. "Today marks the deadline for your decision. Before you respond, does anyone have questions about the terms?" My father attempted one last negotiation. "The therapy requirement, is that negotiable? Perhaps individual counseling instead of family sessions?" "No," I replied firmly. "The family therapy is non-negotiable. The issues we need to address are relational, not individual." He nodded stiffly. "Do you accept the terms as presented, without modification?" I asked, looking at each of them. My mother spoke first. "I accept the terms." Madison followed immediately. "I accept as well." All eyes turned to my father. The proud man who had dismissed my potential now faced a choice that would define our family's future. After a long silence, he straightened in his chair. "I accept your terms." Relief visibly washed over my mother and sister. "However," he continued, "I want to add something, not a condition but a request." He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "This contains a personal letter I've written to you, Nathan. I ask that you read it privately after we leave. It won't change anything about our agreement, but I hope it might contribute to understanding." I nodded, accepting the envelope without comment. We spent the next hour signing documents, mortgage restructuring agreements, business investment terms, therapy commitments, and scholarship foundation papers. When it was done, Elliot provided each of them copies of the executed agreements. As they prepared to leave, Madison approached me. "When should we start working on the business pivot?" "I'll have my team contact you next week to begin the transition," I replied. "The MBA applications should be your first priority." She nodded, then surprised me with a brief but genuine hug. "Thank you for seeing what I could be, rather than just what I've been." My mother hugged me as well, whispering, "We'll do better, Nathan." "I promise." My father simply extended his hand, which I shook formally. His expression carried a complexity of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. After they left, Elliot closed the conference room door. "Well, that's done. How do you feel?" I considered the question carefully. "I'm not sure yet. Relieved, I think, and oddly hollow." "Anticlimactic?" "Perhaps," I acknowledged. 15 years is a long time to work toward a single moment. Back in my office, I opened my father's envelope. The letter inside was handwritten on his personal stationery. Nathan. Pride has always been my fatal flaw. Pride in my judgment. Pride in my ability to identify potential. Pride in knowing what's best for this family. Today, that pride lies shattered at my feet. I won't offer excuses for redirecting your college fund. At the time, I genuinely believed I was making the right decision for the family. I saw Madison's early academic success as a clear indicator of future achievement. I saw your quieter, steadier qualities as less exceptional, less worthy of investment. I was catastrophically wrong. The evidence of my error isn't just in your financial success, impressive as it is. It's in the methodical patience with which you built it, the strategic vision that guided your companies, the discipline you maintained for 15 years, waiting for precisely the right moment to reveal the truth. These are qualities I failed to recognize or value. Qualities that, ironically, mirror those that built my own early success before I allowed pride to cloud my judgment. I accepted your terms today not just because they represent our only viable financial option, but because they are fundamentally fair. The Scholarship Foundation is fitting restitution. The therapy requirement is necessary medicine. Madison's business structure is better than anything I would have designed. I have no right to ask for forgiveness, so I won't. Instead, I make this commitment. I will honor every aspect of our agreement, not grudgingly, but wholeheartedly. I will participate in the therapy with genuine effort. I will defer to your business judgment regarding Madison's venture. I will acknowledge publicly, through the Scholarship Foundation, the error in how I allocated family resources. Whether we can rebuild a father-son relationship remains to be seen. That will depend on more than just this letter or your terms. It will require consistent action over time, something you understand far better than I ever did. For now, I simply say this. You have earned this moment of vindication through extraordinary effort and patience. While I regret the circumstances that made it necessary, I cannot help but admire the man you've become despite my failures as your father. Robert Wilson. I read the letter twice, then set it aside, emotions too complex to immediately process. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was an acknowledgement, perhaps the most honest my father had ever been with me. 6 months later, the changes in our family were substantial. The mortgage had been restructured, with my parents making regular contributions to the newly established scholarship fund. 3 deserving students had already received full tuition grants. Madison was thriving in her MBA program while working with her business mentor to pivot her company. The diagnostic technology was being refined for licensing to major supplement manufacturers, with promising early interest. The family therapy sessions were challenging but productive. Old patterns didn't disappear overnight, but they were being identified, discussed, and gradually revised. My father struggled the most with the process, but he participated consistently, honoring his commitment. As for me, I found myself in an unexpected position. The revelation that had consumed 15 years of planning was now behind me. The question remained: what would define the next chapter of my life? The answer came gradually. Meridian Holdings continued to expand, but I found myself increasingly drawn to educational philanthropy. The Scholarship Foundation became more than just symbolic justice. It became a mission to identify overlooked potential in unexpected places. I began mentoring first-generation college students, sharing insights from my journey. There was something profoundly satisfying about helping others navigate obstacles similar to those I had faced. My relationship with my family evolved cautiously. Trust rebuilt slowly, through consistent actions rather than dramatic gestures. Madison and I developed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect rather than competitive comparison. My mother became more authentic, less defined by her role as my father's echo. My father and I maintained a more formal relationship, but one marked by growing respect. He consulted me on business matters, acknowledging my expertise without resentment. I found myself recognizing in him qualities I had inherited: determination, strategic thinking, attention to detail, while rejecting the pride that had been his downfall. 1 year after our confrontation, we gathered for the first scholarship award ceremony. Standing at the podium, watching 3 students receive the opportunities I had been denied, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The Nathan Wilson First Generation Scholarship, I explained to the audience, was born from the recognition that potential comes in many forms. Sometimes the quietest student in the room is the one with the most to offer. Sometimes the most promising path isn't immediately obvious. I glanced at my family sitting in the front row. My father, solemn and attentive. My mother wiping away tears. Madison nodding in understanding. These scholarships represent our commitment to looking beyond the obvious, to investing in determination and resilience rather than just conventional markers of potential. After the ceremony, a young scholarship recipient approached me, her parents beside her. "Mr. Wilson, thank you for this opportunity," she said earnestly. "My community college professors saw something in me that others missed. This scholarship means I can transfer to university without crushing debt." Her words echoed my own experience in ways she couldn't know. "Your potential is worth investing in," I told her. "Make the most of it." Later that evening, as we shared a family dinner, something that had become a monthly tradition, my father raised his glass. "To potential," he said, meeting my eyes directly, "in all its forms." It wasn't a grand declaration of transformed understanding. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation scene. It was simply an acknowledgement of truth, the beginning of wisdom rather than its completion. I raised my glass in return. "To potential," I echoed, "and to second chances." The journey wasn't over. The damage of decades couldn't be undone in a single year. But we had begun something authentic, a family relationship based on who we actually were, rather than who my parents had assumed I would be. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in dramatic revelation or satisfying revenge, but in the quiet transformation that follows. In the realignment of relationships around truth rather than illusion. In the recognition, however belated, of potential that was always there, waiting to be seen. That recognition, more than the financial success or the vindication, was what I had been seeking all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories. Right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.